The horse screamed. Not the pained cry of an animal that had stumbled, but the full-throated, wide-eyed terror of a beast that smelled something it could not place. And Henry Dalton dropped the iron shoe he was sizing and lunged for the gelding's bridle before Captain Renwick's prize roan could kick the way station wall clean apart. "Easy," Henry said, low and firm, putting his chest against the horse's neck, his hand flat over the animal's eye. "Easy, easy, easy." The gelding trembled. Steam poured from its nostrils into the bitter mountain air, and outside the half-open door of the way station's stone stable, snow was falling in hard, driving curtains against the Thornback Pass. Henry could hear it hissing against the walls, could feel the cold sliding under the door in long, predatory fingers. The pass was already difficult in late autumn. By morning, if the storm held, it would be genuinely dangerous. That was not what had spooked the horse. Henry eased around the gelding's flank, keeping one hand trailing along its coat, and looked out through the gap in the stable door. She was standing in the road. He almost did not see her at first because she stood so still, and the snow was coming down so hard that everything more than 20 feet away was just a pale gray suggestion of the world. But then she moved, one slow step forward, and he saw the green of her skin through the white, saw the broad line of her shoulders, saw the glint of a short blade at her hip that she was deliberately not reaching for. An orc woman, alone, in Thornback Pass on the eve of a blizzard. Henry stood in the gap of the stable door for a long moment. Behind him, the gelding had calmed to a low, suspicious trembling. He could hear the other horses in the way station's main building, where the cavalry's mounts were stabled in the larger bays, 12 animals belonging to Captain Renwick's column, which had been pinned in the pass for 3 days now, waiting for the weather to break. He could hear, farther back, the low voices of soldiers around a fire. He stepped out into the snow. She watched him come. She did not move, did not reach for the blade, and as he closed the distance between them, he got his first real look at her, and he felt something shift in his chest in a way that had nothing to do with cold or danger or the 7 soldiers 40 feet behind him. She was tall, nearly as tall as he was, with the lean, powerful build of someone who had been moving hard and fast through rough country for a long time. Her skin was a deep, muted green, the color of pine needles in winter shadow, and her eyes, which were watching him with a steadiness that was almost unnervingly calm, were the color of pale amber, gold shot through with brown, striking enough to make him forget for a moment what he had been about to say. Her hair was dark, pulled back and braided with small iron rings threaded through the plait, and her ears came to a slight point beneath it. Her tusks were small and neat, the lower ones barely a centimeter above her lip, and there was a scar, fine as a wire, that ran from the outer corner of her left eye to her jaw. She was wearing fitted traveling leathers, dark brown, close to black, with seams that followed the line of her body the way a well-made saddle follows the horse beneath it. A cinched waist belt, sturdy and wide, held the short blade and a small pack of tools he could not identify from here. Over the leathers she had a travel cloak, heavy wool, gray-black with trail dust and dried mud on the hem, and beneath the belt the leathers fit close enough that he could see she moved like a fighter, the weight balanced, the feet placed with habit. Nothing she wore was decorative. Everything was practical and well-made and utterly suited to the woman inside it. He stopped about 6 feet from her. "The pass is closed," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I know," she said. Her voice was lower than he had expected and level. "I am not trying to cross it. I need to shelter until the storm passes. This is a cavalry way station. It belongs to—" "I know what it is," she said. "I am not asking for a welcome. I am asking for a roof and a place by a fire where I will not lose my fingers. I will sleep outside the building if you prefer, but the overhang on the east side will do if there is nothing else." He looked at her for a long moment. Snow was building on her shoulders in the coils of her braided hair. She was cold. She was not letting him see it, but she was cold. "How long have you been walking?" he asked. Something shifted behind her eyes. "Long enough." Henry turned and looked back at the way station. The main door was closed. Through one of the narrow stone windows he could see firelight and the shadows of men moving. Captain Renwick was in there. So were 2 lieutenants and 5 soldiers who had, over the past 3 days, made their feelings about the Ashwalker clan clear enough in the conversations Henry had not been part of but had overheard while he worked. The Ashwalkers were the Orc clan camped 2 days south at the mouth of the pass. There had been raids on border farms. There had been casualties on both sides. The cavalry column was here officially to negotiate, but Henry had seen the state of Renwick's jaw when he said the word negotiate, and he had not believed it. The woman in front of him was an Orc. That was all Renwick's men would see. Henry Dalton had a simple, consistent practice when it came to decisions. He asked himself what was true, and he acted on it. What was true was that a woman was standing in a blizzard asking for a roof over her head, and she had walked. He could see from the state of her boots, somewhere between 15 and 20 miles today through snow and rock. "Come with me," he said, and turned back toward the stable. She followed without a word. He took her to the small storage room off the back of the stable, not the soldiers' quarters, not the main hall, but a stone room with a low ceiling, and a small brazier that he got going in less time than he had expected, fueled with the coal left stacked by the last cavalry rotation through the pass. It was not warm, but it was not the wind. She sat on the floor near the brazier with her back against the wall and watched him work. When the fire was going and the room had started to lose its killing edge of cold, he straightened and looked at her. "I am Henry Dalton," he said. "Farrier. I shoe the horses." She considered this for a moment as though measuring whether the information was a threat or an offer. "Vola Ashwalker," she said. He nearly kept his face still. "Nearly." "Ashwalker," he said carefully. Yes, her amber eyes did not flinch. "The clan 2 days south. The clan your captain is here to negotiate with or to threaten depending on who you believe. I know what you have heard. I know what you think it means." Henry pulled a short stool from the corner and sat on it. Outside, the blizzard hit the way station walls with a sustained, low roar. "What does it mean?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am exiled from my own clan 3 months ago." She said it flatly, the way you state a weather condition, not to invite sympathy, not to deflect it, but because it was simply what was true. "The raids your soldiers are discussing had nothing to do with me, but I carry the name, so I carry the suspicion. It is the way of things." "Why were you exiled?" Her eyes settled on him with an assessment that he felt like a hand pressing against his sternum. "Because I left before they could push me out," she said. "My standing in the clan was crumbling. The elder council had decided I was too independent, too unwilling to follow the warband's direction. They were going to strip my rank and exile me formally, as a humiliation. So I stripped myself of the clan marks and walked. You cannot be publicly shamed for something you already took from them." Henry thought about that. "That must have been a hard decision." "It was the only one I was willing to make," she said. And then, very quietly, as if she had not meant to say it aloud, "It is always easier to leave than to wait." There was something in those words that landed in him differently than the rest had, and he was not entirely sure why, except that he recognized them. He recognized the shape of them, the habit of self-protection dressed up as boldness. He did not say any of that. He said, "There is salt dried meat and hard bread in the stable supplies. Not much, but enough. I am not asking for food. I know," he said. "I am offering it anyway." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that it became something other than suspicion. "All right," she said. That was the first night. Henry had been at Thornback Way Station for 11 days. He had arrived with Renwick's column as the contracted farrier. The cavalry's horses needed their shoes checked and reset before any serious winter deployment, and the army did not keep a farrier in its ranks, so they hired one. Henry worked alone and charged fair rates and kept to himself, which was the life he had built over the past 8 years since leaving the Valley farm where he had grown up. He was 31. He had no family still living that he was close to. He had a good set of tools, a reputation among the cavalry stations along the Thornback Road, and a horse of his own, a steady, plain-looking brown mare named Brick who was stabled with the others and thought very highly of herself. He was not unhappy. He did not have a word for what he was exactly, but unhappy was not it. He worked hard and the work was satisfying and the mountains were beautiful. If there was a hollow place in the center of his life, he had learned, over the years, not to press on it too often. He checked on Vola once during the night, quietly, so that none of Renwick's men would see. She was asleep when he looked in, sitting upright with her cloak around her and her back against the stone wall, the way someone sleeps who has not slept in a proper bed in a long time. He stood in the doorway just for a moment, and then he turned and went back to his own spot in the hay. In the morning, the blizzard had not let up. Henry was at the forge by first light, a small covered forge attached to the stable, where he kept the fire banked through the night for the horse's morning shoeing work. He was fitting a new shoe to Renwick's roan, the one that had spooked the night before, when he heard footsteps and looked up to find Vola in the stable doorway. She had repinned her braid and cleaned the road dust from her cloak as best she could. In the gray morning light of the stable she looked rested, and more present than she had the night before. The numbness of the cold and exhaustion had gone from her eyes, and what was left was sharp and watchful and something else he could not name yet. "I can hold him," she said, nodding at the roan, who was already beginning to shift under Henry's hands. Henry looked at her. "You know horses." "I know that one is about to step on your foot," she said. He moved his foot. The horse's hoof came down exactly where it had been. She came into the stable, steady and unhurried, and put her hand on the roan's neck the way he had done the night before, flat palm, deliberate pressure, her body close enough to block the animal's sideways view. The roan settled with a long exhale. "Huh," Henry said. "Orcs work with horses too," she said mildly. "The prejudice cuts many directions." He went back to the hoof. He was aware of her standing 2 feet away, the controlled warmth of her, the particular stillness that she carried like armor. He had met people like that before, people who had pared themselves down to what was necessary, because the alternative was being overwhelmed. He recognized the discipline of it even if he did not know the specific grief behind it. "The men inside will see you eventually," he said. He kept his voice low. "Yes. Renwick is not a reasonable man." He paused, set the shoe against the hoof. "He is not completely unreasonable either, but he has spent 2 weeks hearing about what the Ashwalker clan did to the farms at Belford Crossing, and he arrived here already looking for a reason." "And I am a reason," she said. "You are an Ashwalker," he said. To him that is enough. She was quiet for a moment. The roan dropped its head and sighed like an old dog. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "I am telling you what is true so you can decide what you want to do with it." She looked at him sideways. There was something almost amused in her expression and something else, something more careful, more considered. "You do not lie," she said. "It was not quite a question." "Not if I can avoid it," he said. "It is more work than it is worth." The sound she made was not quite a laugh, but it was something adjacent to one. He felt it in his ribs. The storm held another 2 days. In those 2 days, Henry and Vola did not do anything remarkable by the standards of the world. They worked. He shod horses, checked hooves, managed 2 loose shoes on the lieutenant's mounts, and replaced a cracked shoe on Brick. She helped him, steadily and without being asked, once she had decided she was going to. She held horses and handed him tools, and at one point picked up the second hammer when he needed both ends worked simultaneously on a seam, and she hit it clean, and even without him having to show her how. Between horses they talked, in the way people talk when they are doing something else simultaneously, which is to say honestly, and without the performance that comes when a conversation is the only thing happening. He learned that she was 27, that she had been the Ashwalker clan's second-ranked warband scout for 4 years before the council's patience with her independence ran out, that she had a sister still in the clan whom she had not spoken to since the Exile, and that this was the thing she did not talk about, which he could tell by the careful way she navigated around it. That she had been to Thornback Pass before, twice, years ago, on scouting routes that had nothing to do with the current trouble. She learned that he had been a farrier for 8 years after 3 years, as a stable hand on a cavalry post. That he had learned the work from a retired army farrier named Combe, who had been the best person Henry had ever known, and who had died of a fever 6 years ago. That Henry had no permanent address, just a circuit of way station contracts from the southern lowlands to the northern passes, and that this had suited him fine for a long time, but that fine and good were not the same word. On the second night, she sat across the brazier from him in the storage room and asked, "Why do you do it alone?" He looked at the fire for a moment. "The work, the living," she said. He was quiet. "I do not know," he said finally. "There is always somewhere to be next. It is easier to move than to stay." She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he felt, for the second time, the particular sensation of being seen clearly by someone who was not trying to make him feel anything about it, just looking, the way a good scout looks, taking in what is true without deciding in advance what it should be. "Yes," she said, and he knew she was not agreeing with the easiness of it. On the morning of the third day, Captain Renwick's sergeant opened the stable door. His name was Farrell, a wide, blunt-faced man who was good with a sword and bad with ideas, which made him, in Henry's experience, one of the more dangerous kinds. He stopped in the doorway with the morning's thin gray light behind him and looked from Henry to Vola and back again, and his face went through 3 distinct expressions in about 2 seconds. "What in the name of the mountain gods?" he said. Henry set down his hammer. "Good morning, Farrell. There is an orc in the stable. Her name is Vola Ashwalker," Henry said. "She sheltered from the storm. She has not touched anything that does not belong to her, and she has been helping with the horses." Farrell looked at Vola. Vola looked back at Farrell with the particular equanimity of a woman who had decided, before the conversation began, that she would not be moved by it. "She is an Ashwalker," Farrell said, and the word had the weight of a sentence in it. "She is exiled from the Ashwalker clan," Henry said. "She has been for 3 months. She has no standing with the warband and no connection to the Belford raids." "That is what she told you." "Yes," Henry said, and I believed her. Farrell stared at him. "The captain will want to know about this." "Tell him," Henry said. "She is not hiding." Farrell left. Vola had not moved. Her hands were still resting loose at her sides, and when Henry looked at her, she was watching the door where Farrell had been with an expression that was very calm and very tired at the same time. "I told you," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "You did." Renwick came himself 20 minutes later with 2 of his soldiers at his back. He was a tall man, lean in the way of someone who was always slightly hungry, with a cavalry officer's straight posture and a scar on his chin from an old fight. He was not stupid. He was also not, as Henry had assessed, completely unreasonable. He was, however, afraid, which was the most dangerous state for a man with authority and soldiers. He looked at Vola the way a man looks at a problem he has not scheduled. "Ashwalker," he said. "Exiled," she said. "Your clan is 2 days south." "My former clan," she said. "I have not been among them for 3 months. I was traveling alone through the pass when the storm caught me. I asked shelter. It was granted." She paused. "I am not an embassy captain. I am not a spy. I am a woman who did not want to die of cold on a mountain road." Renwick looked at Henry. "She is telling the truth," Henry said. "You cannot know that. I can assess it as best a person can assess anything. She has not asked me anything about your troop strength, your supply lines, or your orders. She has asked me to hand her the rasp 3 times. One of the soldiers behind Renwick made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Renwick's expression did not change. "She stays in the stable," Renwick said. "She does not come into the main building. She does not approach the men." He looked at Vola. "When the storm clears, you leave." "Gladly," Vola said. Renwick left. The soldiers left. Henry went back to his work. Vola did not say anything for a while, then she said, "Thank you. I told them the truth," he said. "That is all." "You told them the truth for me," she said. "That is different." He looked up at her. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite interpret, something that was not quite softness and not quite strength but lived in the territory between them. "It should not be," he said. The storm broke the following morning. Henry was in the stable before dawn because the horses always knew first. They got restless when the barometric pressure shifted. And this morning every animal in the building was moving, heads coming over doors, ears forward. The blizzard had dropped to a wind, and the wind had dropped to a breeze, and by the time the sky was light enough to see, the pass was visible again, gray and white and brutally cold but passable. He found Vola in the storage room with her cloak packed tight and her belt fastened, and her face arranged into the expression of someone who has already said goodbye to a place internally and is just waiting for the body to follow. "Ready?" he said. "I have been ready," she said. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He was aware of something gathering in him, that he did not have a clean name for a reluctance, a specific reluctance, the kind that is about a particular thing rather than circumstances in general. "Where are you going?" he asked. "South," she said, "past the pass mouth. There is a town called Harrow's Ford. I have done work there before, guiding, tracking. They are not fond of orcs, but they are fond of money, and I am good at my work." "You will pass close to the Ashwalker camp." "Yes," her voice was level. "I know how to move quietly." He stepped back from the doorway to let her out. She walked past him, and as she did he caught the smell of wood smoke and cold stone, and something underneath those that was simply her, warm and alive, and he pressed his jaw together and said nothing. She walked out into the courtyard of the way station. The snow was shin-deep and blue-white in the early light, and she moved through it with the long, even strides of someone used to difficult ground. Henry followed her to the way station gate, which was closed, a heavy iron-banded door in a low stone wall, and he lifted the bar for her. She stopped on the other side of the gate and turned back. "Henry Dalton," she said. "Yes." "You are the first person in 3 months who has spoken to me as if I were a person." She said it without drama, without self-pity, just recording a fact. "I want you to know that I noticed." He did not know what to say to that. He was not generally a man who fell silent, but he was silent now, with the cold air between them and the pale morning light turning her skin from deep green to something richer, something that had gold in it, and her amber eyes steady on his face. "I noticed you too," he said. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but she nodded once as if it were and turned back to the road. He watched her walk until she was a dark shape in the white, and then until she was nothing. He closed the gate. He thought about her for the next 3 weeks in a low, persistent way that was different from how he usually thought about people he had met and parted from. He thought about the way she held horses. He thought about the way she said it is always easier to leave than to wait, as if she had been living inside that idea for so long she had forgotten it was a choice. He thought about her amber eyes in the gray morning light. He shod Renwick's remaining horses. He reseated 3 loose shoes, dealt with a cracked hoof wall on one of the lieutenant's animals, and trimmed and balanced all 12 cavalry horses in preparation for their eventual march south. He was good at his work. He was always good at his work. It was one of the things he could say about himself without qualification. Renwick's column began its southward march 10 days after the storm cleared, and Henry marched with them as the contracted farrier, which meant he was technically under Renwick's authority until the column reached its destination, a garrison town called Caldenmere at the base of the pass. It was on the 2nd day of the march, when the column came around a long bend in the road, and the Ashwalker camp came into view below them on the valley floor, that things went wrong. The camp was larger than Renwick had expected. That was visible from the road. You could see it in the way Renwick's shoulders changed shape when he saw it, some calculation revising itself behind his eyes. There were at least 60 tents, maybe more, and the smoke of many fires, and people moving in the camp streets in the particular organized way of a military encampment that is not surprised to see visitors but is ready for them. Renwick had been told to negotiate. Henry had been correct that Renwick did not entirely mean it, but Renwick was also not a fool, and 60 tents meant at least 100 warriors, and he had 12 soldiers and a farrier. He sent his lieutenants down ahead with a white cloth. Henry waited with the column. He watched the distant movement of the camp, the small figures going back and forth between it and the approaching lieutenants, and he thought with a precision that surprised him that Vola was not down there. She had been traveling south when she left the way station. She had been moving away from the Ashwalker camp, not toward it. She was gone, and she had been gone for 3 weeks, and she was not his to find. He kept thinking it anyway. The lieutenants came back. The news was not good. The Ashwalker Elder Council had agreed to meet with Renwick, but the terms they had set were formal and public, a meeting in the camp's central ground, with all the clan watching, which was an Orc tradition of binding witness. Renwick had to accept because refusing it would be an insult that would end any negotiation before it began, and even Renwick understood that 12 soldiers did not win a fight against 100 Ashwalker warriors in the Ashwalker camp. They went down. Henry had no role in a negotiation. He led Brick through the camp gate and stayed at the column's edge, holding the horses while the officers talked. The Ashwalker camp was loud and alive, cooking fires, children running between tent posts, warriors in close-fitted leather armor watching the cavalry column with the flat, careful attention of people who have learned not to show what they are thinking. Henry kept his own face neutral and his hands busy with Brick's bridle. It was when he looked up from adjusting a strap that he saw Vola. She was standing at the edge of the camp's central ground, not among the Ashwalker warriors but separate from them, about 20 feet outside the circle of watching clan members. She was wearing the same travel leathers, the same dark cloak, and her face was wrong. Not wrong the way she had been cold and exhausted at the way station. Wrong the way a person's face goes when they are somewhere they knew would hurt, and it is hurting exactly as much as they thought it would. She was watching the meeting. She was watching the Elder Council, 4 old orcs in heavy ceremonial cloaks with the Ashwalker clan markings clear on their faces, and from where Henry stood he could see that one of the elders was watching her back. A woman older with Vola's same amber eyes and a jaw set the same way. Her mother, he thought, or her aunt, someone who shared blood. He thought she came back. She came back to watch the negotiation, to see what was going to happen to her former clan, because she still cared about the people in it even though they had made caring about them into something she could not afford. He thought, she is going to leave before it is over. She is going to stand there until she cannot stand it anymore, and then she is going to leave before anyone can see her do it. He handed Brick's reins to the nearest cavalry soldier without a word and walked through the crowd toward her. She saw him coming when he was still 10 feet away. Her expression went from the carefully controlled grief he had caught from a distance to something more complex surprise, then something shuddered over the surprise, and then she said quietly in a voice for him only, "What are you doing here?" "Walking toward you," he said. "I can see that." She glanced at the cavalry group at the negotiating circle back at him. "You should not be here. I am the column's farrier. I am here officially." He stopped beside her, not quite shoulder to shoulder, but close enough. "Are you all right?" She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "No." He appreciated the honesty. He stayed where he was. Around them the camp hummed and watched, and the negotiation continued in the formal Orc meeting language that he did not speak but whose rhythms he could feel, the careful, slow exchange of grievance and demand, the pauses for witness. "The elder watching you," he said quietly. "Who is she?" A long pause. "My mother's sister," she said. "Brenna Ashwalker. She was one of the council members who voted for my exile." "Voted for your exile but did not stop it when you chose to leave first." "There was no difference to the outcome. There was a difference to the feeling," he said. She turned and looked at him. She had not turned to look at him since he had walked up, and now she did fully, and what was in her face was something raw that he thought she had probably not let anyone see in a while. "Yes," she said very quietly. "There was." The negotiation took 2 hours. Renwick conceded more than he had wanted to the Ashwalker clan, kept 3 contested farms on the Belford Road, agreeing to a border line that left the cavalry posts' grazing lands intact. There were things Henry did not fully understand, political things about water rights and winter grazing and trade access, but the outcome, when the council and Renwick pressed their palms to a parchment treaty, seemed to be something close to peace, or at least close to an agreement not to immediately make war, which in Henry's experience was often the most you could ask for. Throughout the proceedings, Vola stood beside him and said nothing. When it was over, and the Ashwalker warriors began to disperse and Renwick's officers began to gather their horses and order the column for departure, the elder woman, Vola Ashwalker, crossed the central ground toward them. Henry felt Vola go absolutely still. Vola was a formidable woman, 60 or more, with the same lean, powerful build her niece had, and the face of someone who had spent decades making hard decisions. She stopped 3 feet from Vola and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then she said something in the Ashwalker language, low and rough, and Vola said something back just as low, and the exchange was too fast and too quiet for Henry to follow any of it, but the shape of it was not a fight. It was something more careful than a fight. Something that had been carried for a long time and was being set down partially in a public place, which was not the ideal place to set it down but was better than never. Vola looked at Henry. He met her eyes. She said something to Vola, still in the clan language. Vola said, "He is with me." Vola looked at him a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the camp. Henry looked at Vola. "What did she say?" he asked. At the end, Vola's jaw worked. She was looking at the space where her aunt had been. She said that if I had to keep company with humans, I had at least chosen one who knew where to stand. She paused. It is a compliment in the Ashwalker tongue. Knowing where to stand means you are not moved by things that are beneath you. Henry thought about that. And you said he is with me. Yes. Are you surprised you said that? She was quiet for a long moment and then she said, somewhat. He smiled, just a small one, and said nothing. The column formed up and began its march toward Caldenmere. Henry walked with it, and when he looked back once at the edge of the camp, Vola was still standing where he had left her. He thought, she is going to leave again. She always leaves. Caldenmere was 3 days' march from the Ashwalker camp, and they arrived on an afternoon when the weather had turned cold and clear, the sky above the pass a hard, brilliant blue. It was a proper town, 100 buildings or more, a garrison fort at the north end, a market square with stalls and noise and the smell of food that made Henry's mouth water after 3 days of trail rations. Renwick's column marched through with the satisfied energy of soldiers who had done their job and were looking forward to hot food and a fire. Henry led Brick through the main street and found the town's blacksmith to arrange the use of the forge, as he always did in new towns, and the blacksmith's wife gave him a room above the smithy that was small and clean and had a window facing the market square. He spent 2 days in Caldenmere finishing the cavalry horses, collecting his contracted payment from Renwick's quartermaster, and thinking about Vola Ashwalker with a persistence that was beginning to feel less like idle thought and more like something he needed to do something about. He did not know what to do about it. He was a farrier alone on a circuit of mountain contracts. She was an orc exile who had just stood in her former clan's camp and watched them negotiate a peace treaty she was not part of. The world between those two facts was not a small distance. On the evening of the second day, he went to the market square and bought a meal from one of the stalls and sat on a stone wall eating it and watching the light go off the mountains to the west. He was thinking, in a way he rarely let himself think, about the hollow place in the center of his life and what it would mean to let something fill it. He was still sitting there when she walked into the square. She was moving with her usual deliberate stride, her dark cloak over the travel leathers, her braid catching the last of the evening light, and she was scanning the square with the habit of someone who is always assessing space and exit routes, and then her eyes found him and stopped. He raised a hand, not a wave, just an acknowledgement. She crossed the square and stood in front of him. "You followed the column," he said. "Harrow's Ford is south of Caldenmere," she said. "I was passing through." A pause. "Renwick's men are here. In the garrison, they will not bother you unless you give them a reason." "I know how to give no reason," she said. He shifted over on the wall. "Sit down." There is a meat stall with something that tastes like actual food. She sat. Not far from him, the wall was short, and he was aware of the warmth of her arm near his and the way she settled, careful and precise, the way she did everything. He got her food from the stall. She raised an eyebrow when he came back with it, but she did not argue, just took the bowl and ate, and they sat in the cooling square as the sky went from blue to deep gray, and the market stall lights came up one by one. "What will you do in Harrow's Ford?" he asked. "What I said. Guide work, tracking. They have a cartographer who needed someone who knows the northern passes in winter. I wrote to him before the storm caught me." She was quiet for a moment. "It is work, it is enough." "Is it?" She looked at him sideways. "What is it you are asking, Henry Dalton?" He turned and looked at her directly. She held his gaze as she always did, without flinching or deflecting. "I am asking," he said, "whether enough is what you want or whether you settled for it." The word settled landed visibly. He saw it in the slight tension around her eyes. "You speak plainly," she said. "I said I do not lie if I can avoid it," he said. "Plain is part of that." She looked back at the square for a moment. The evening was coming in cold off the mountains. "I do not know what I want," she said. "I have been surviving for 3 months. Surviving and wanting are different activities." "Yes," he said, "I know." She looked at him again, and this time the assessment was more open than it had been, something she was letting him see, not hiding it. "You have been surviving for 8 years, she said. "Approximately," he said. "That is a long time to make do with enough." "Yes," he said, "it is." They were very quiet for a moment. The market square was loud around them. People calling, a child laughing somewhere, the clatter of a dropped bucket. But between them there was a particular stillness, the kind that builds between two people who are being honest with each other about something difficult and are not running from it. Then she reached out, very deliberate, and put her hand over his where it rested on the wall. Her hand was larger than his, stronger, the grip of someone who had spent years with a sword and a climbing rope, and it was warm despite the cold air. He turned his hand over and held hers back. They sat like that while the last light left the mountains. The trouble came the next morning. Henry was at the forge before dawn, as always, working on Brick's shoes. She had thrown one on the last day of the march, and he had been meaning to reset it when he heard the noise from the market square. He set down the hammer and went to the smithy door. There was a crowd forming around the well at the square's center. He could hear raised voices, and above the voices a lower sound, controlled and steady, that he recognized before he saw the source of it. He was across the square in under a minute. Vola was standing at the well with her back to the stone coping, facing a rough semicircle of perhaps 15 men, market workers and soldiers both, some in Renwick's colors, some in the plain clothes of townspeople. She had not drawn her blade. She was standing with her arms loose at her sides, and her face arranged into the expression of absolute, glacial calm that he had learned was her armor when she was most vulnerable, and she was the only one in the crowd who was not shouting. The man at the front of the crowd was Farrell. Henry had never liked Farrell. He had never hated him either. He was not a man who spent energy hating, but he liked him even less, suddenly and strongly, standing here. "Ashwalker," Farrell was saying, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has found a grievance he was already looking for. "What is an exile doing in a garrison town? Scouting for the clan, reporting back on the treaty terms." "I am buying salt bread," Vola said. Her voice was completely level. "At a bread stall." She held up the wrapped parcel in her left hand as evidence. A couple of men in the crowd laughed, but not kindly. "She should not be here," someone behind Farrell said. "We just signed a treaty. Having an Ashwalker in the town is an insult." "She is no longer Ashwalker by standing," Vola said. "As I have explained, and as your captain confirmed at the way station, I am an exile." "That is what you say," Farrell said. "That is what is true," she said. "The orc's word against the sergeants," someone called from the back, and the crowd shifted in that ugly way crowds shift when they find something to agree on. Farrell stepped forward. He was a big man, as wide as he was tall, and he had the kind of physicality that he used as a threat without quite making a direct one. Just moving into someone's space until they moved back, and using their moving back as permission. Vola did not move back. Farrell stopped when she did not move, surprise flickering across his face. "I think you should leave this town," he said. "I think you should step back," she said. Her voice had not changed in volume or tone. "There are 15 of us." "Yes," she said. "I can count." Henry stepped through the edge of the crowd, which parted for him mostly because he moved as though it would, and came to stand beside Vola. He was aware of the crowd's attention shifting, of the recalculation that happened in Farrell's eyes, and he said nothing because there was nothing to say yet that would be useful. Vola glanced at him. He looked straight at Farrell. "Sergeant Farrell," he said. "Good morning." Farrell stared at him. "Dalton, this is not your concern." "I think it might be," Henry said. "She is with me." "She is an Ashwalker." "She is Vola," Henry said. "Formerly of the Ashwalker clan, currently resident in no clan, presently buying bread in a market square that does not, to my knowledge, have a rule against orc women buying bread." He paused. "Unless it does, in which case I would like to see that ordinance." Someone in the crowd laughed, a genuine one this time, and the ugly energy of the group shifted, not much, but enough. Farrell's face went red. "You have no authority here, farrier." "No," Henry agreed. "I just have the truth." Farrell looked from Henry to Vola and back. The crowd was watching the recalculation happen on his face, and the thing about a crowd, Henry had learned, was that they could always sense when the person they were following was losing their conviction. Farrell said, "If she is found in contact with the Ashwalker warband." "She will not be," Henry said. "I am personally guaranteeing that." This was a significant thing to say. Everyone present knew it. Farrell knew it, and the knowing made him angrier, but it also stopped him. Because a personal guarantee from a man with a free and fair-dealing reputation meant something in the mountain towns, even if that man was only a farrier. Farrell looked at Vola for a long moment. She looked back without blinking. He turned and walked away. The crowd dissipated in the way of crowds that have been cheated of their excitement, grumbling, dispersing, looking for something else. Henry stood in the suddenly emptying square beside Vola. She was still holding the bread. She looked down at it, looked up at him. "That was very stupid," she said. "It worked," he said. "This time," she said. "If Farrell decides to push it or if he goes to Renwick, then I will deal with Renwick," Henry said. "I have shot his horses for 2 campaigns. He owes me something for that." He paused. "Besides, Renwick knows you are not a threat. He signed a treaty yesterday. He does not want this kind of trouble any more than you do." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You stood in the road." It was a quiet thing to say, and he was not entirely sure what she meant by it, but something in her voice made the hairs on his arm stand up under his coat. "What?" he said. "When you walked through the crowd," she said. "You just walked through it as if there was no question of stopping, as if the road belonged to you." She paused. "Nobody has stood in the road for me before." He was quiet. "Someone should," he said. She breathed. Just one breath, deep and even, and something in her face that had been very carefully closed opened. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. "I am going to Harrow's Ford," she said. "In the morning." He nodded. "I want you to come with me," she said. It was not a question, and it was not quite a statement. It was something between those two, the kind of thing that comes from a person who is used to not asking for things and is making the effort to ask for this one. Henry looked at Brick, who was tied at the smithy post across the square with her excellent opinion of herself evident in every line of her. "I have no contract south of Caldenmere," he said. "But Harrow's Ford will have horses that need shoes." "Yes," she said, "it will." "Then I will come," he said. And she breathed again, and this time what he saw in her face was something closer to the word relief than anything he had expected to put there. They left Caldenmere the next morning before Farrell was awake. Henry had his tools packed on Brick and a 3-day supply of travel food from the market. Vola had her own pack and her short blade and her cloak pinned against the early cold, and they took the southern road out of town in the long, blue shadow of the mountains, walking side by side in the easy rhythm of 2 people who are accustomed to moving in difficult country. For the first mile neither of them said much. The road ran through a pine forest that muffled the wind and made the snow on the ground something almost beautiful rather than hostile, and Henry listened to Brick's steady footfalls and the sound of Vola's breathing beside him and felt something he had not felt in a long time, which was that somewhere was better than nowhere in particular. "Tell me about Harrow's Ford," he said. "Small," she said. "Market town, maybe 400 people. A river ford that they charge a crossing fee for, which is how they fund everything. The cartographer's name is Aldi's old man, good work, needs someone who can verify his pass maps against actual terrain." She paused. "He hired me 3 years ago for a summer survey. He is a fair employer. He will not object to you returning with a human farrier in tow." She glanced at him sideways. "He might object to the horse," Henry laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind he did not produce very often, and she looked at him when she heard it with an expression of such naked, startled interest that he had to look away. "What?" he said. "You do not laugh much," she said. "I am laughing now." "Yes," she said. "I know." They made camp the first night in a forested hollow off the road, a good defensive position by instinct, Vola choosing it before he had said anything about stopping. She built the fire with the efficiency of someone who had done it in every kind of weather, and Henry took care of Brick and then sat across the fire from Vola and ate salt bread and dried meat, and did not feel the need to fill the silence with words. She was watching the fire with the particular inward expression she got when she was thinking about something she was not ready to say. "Tell me about your Exile," he said. "The real version, not the summary." She looked up. "You already know the summary," she said. "I know what you told a stranger in a storm," he said. "I would like to know what you would tell someone who is not a stranger." A long pause. Then she said, "My warband leader was named Corsad. Good fighter, poor thinker, strong opinions about the correct way for a scout to behave, which is to say, his way entirely with no variation. I had 3 years of good service under him. Solid intelligence work, no losses, 2 successful operations that improved the clan's position on the Belford border significantly." She paused. "And then I disobeyed a direct order." "What order?" "He wanted me to take a Caldenmere trader's family as leverage," she said, "for a border negotiation, not to harm them, but to use them." She looked at the fire. "They were not soldiers. They were a merchant and his wife and their hired driver. They had done nothing to us, a beat. I declined." Henry was quiet. "What happened?" he said. "Corsad did it himself with 2 other warriors," she said. "The merchant and his wife were held for 6 days and released unharmed when the negotiation concluded. No blood was shed. Corsad considered it a clean operation." Her jaw worked. "I considered it a wrong one. I made my opinion known to the elder council. Corsad made his opinion about my opinion known. The council was not willing to discipline a war band leader over a successful operation." She paused. "That was when I understood my standing was finished." Henry looked at the fire for a moment. "So you left before they could formally remove you?" "Yes." A short pause. "I was afraid that if I stayed to be formally stripped I would accept it as something I deserved, and I did not deserve it. I was right about the merchant's family." She looked up from the fire and met his eyes. "I know that, I know I was right, but Exile does something to your certainty over time. It keeps asking you whether you were wrong and you left because you were proud, rather than because you were right and they were wrong." She paused. "I sometimes have difficulty telling the difference," Henry said. "The difference is the merchant's family slept in their own beds after 6 days." She breathed. Something released in her face. "Yes," she said, "that is the difference." They were quiet for a while after that. Brick blew softly in the dark at the edge of the firelight. The forest was close and still. "Corsad," Henry said eventually. "Is he still warband leader? As far as I know, yes." "He was there today in the negotiation," she nodded. "Did he see you?" "Yes, a beat. He did not approach me. Because of the Exile or because you are who you are?" A small, sharp smile. "Both, perhaps." Henry leaned back and looked up at the stars coming through the tree canopy. He was aware in the peripheral way that you become aware of things you have been trying not to name, of how much he did not want this to end. The firelight, the cold, Brick snuffling in the dark, Vola 3 feet away making the world feel like it had edges and weight. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said at the way station, about it being easier to leave than to wait." She was very still. "You said it like it was true of you," he said, "like it was a habit." "It is," she said. "I thought the same thing was true of me," he said. "For a long time. I kept moving because the next contract was always a good reason to not stay anywhere long enough to have something to lose." He paused. "I have been wondering whether I am about to have something to lose." She looked at him. He looked back. "I think you might be," she said very quietly. He held her gaze. The fire was low and the night was dark around them, and he was aware of the specific geography of the distance between them, 3 feet, 2 feet, the length of a breath, and then Vola put out her hand, palm up, between them. He took it. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a woman who had made a decision and was not interested in retreating from it, warm and deliberate and tasting of wood smoke and trail food. And Henry let it happen for about half a second before he stopped being passive and kissed her back, which seemed to surprise her slightly because her hand tightened on his. When they separated, she was looking at him with something entirely unguarded in her face. "All right," she said. Her voice was slightly different than usual. "Yes," he said. He was slightly different than usual, too. "I need you to understand something," she said carefully. "I do not do this easily. I am not good at staying. I am very good at leaving. I know this about myself." "I know it too," he said. "I have the same problem in a slightly different form." She watched him. "What if we are both bad at staying?" she said. "Then we are both practicing," he said. A long pause, and then she made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh, real and sudden and not quite controlled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had heard in years. They made it to Harrow's Ford in 3 days. Harrow's Ford was exactly as Vola had described. Small, competent, built around a river crossing that the townspeople charged for with cheerful shamelessness, with the cartographer's house. A tall, narrow building jammed with paper and ink and rolled maps, situated at the edge of town near the Ford Bridge. Aldi's was old and thin and entirely unimpressed by Henry's presence, which Henry found reassuring. "You shoe horses," Aldi said. "Yes," Henry said. "There are 8 horses in this town that need attention," Aldi said. 3 of them belong to me. You can work from the river smithy. I will tell Marcus you are coming." He looked at Vola. "The North Pass survey is ready to begin when you are." "I am ready," she said. "Good," said Aldi's, and went back to his maps. Henry settled into Harrow's Ford with the same ease he settled anywhere, a rented room above the river smithy, an arrangement with the townsfolk for horsework, a daily routine that started before dawn and ended when the light was gone. The town was wary of Vola for the first week, the way mountain towns are wary of orc women, not violently, but with the particular careful politeness that is a wall dressed up as manners. Henry watched her navigate it without flinching, with the same deliberate competence she brought to everything. She left with Aldi's survey team for the North Passes for 5 days. When she came back, she was wind-burned and efficient, and she found Henry at the river smithy with the immediate directness of a woman who has been thinking about where she is going for 5 days. She kissed him in the smithy doorway in front of 2 townspeople who were waiting to have their cart horse shod, which made the townspeople look at each other in a way that Henry noted and entirely did not care about. December came in hard. The ford froze and the river bridge traffic dropped off, which meant fewer travelers passing through, but also meant the town turned inward and became its own community rather than a stopping point. People staying home, people sharing hearth rooms, people needing their horses in top condition for the winter hauls. Henry's work did not decrease. It changed. He and Vola shared a room at the inn by the 2nd week of December, which was not a dramatic event between them. It happened the way things happen between 2 people who have already made up their minds about each other without quite saying so, which is to say it happened because neither of them went back to their separate rooms after one particular evening, and neither of them mentioned that they had not. The inn was old stone, warm inside, smelling of old wood and cook smoke. The room was small and the hearth was adequate and the window looked north toward the mountains, and Henry sat on the window ledge one morning in the blue early light and looked out at the peaks and felt the hollow place in the center of his life press up against something solid, something warm, something that was still there. Vola was behind him, pulling on her belt, getting ready for a survey day. She paused when she saw him looking out the window. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She came to stand behind him, put her hands on his shoulders, looked out the window with him. Her chin was near his temple. She was taller than him when he was sitting, which he liked in a way he had never expected to like anything. "I keep waiting for it to stop feeling like this," she said. "Like what?" he said. "Like something good is happening," she said. "I keep waiting to find the part where it goes wrong." "It might," he said honestly. "Yes," she said, "but it has not yet." He reached up and put his hand over hers on his shoulder. "No," he said, "it has not." The trouble with Renwick came back in January. Henry had not entirely forgotten the possibility, but he had allowed himself to stop expecting it, which was perhaps incautious. Renwick's column had wintered in Caldenmere, which was only a day's ride from Harrow's Ford, and in January a diplomatic crisis reopened along the Belford border, not a breach of the treaty, but a contested interpretation of the boundary lines, and Renwick needed someone who knew the North Passes and the Ashwalker territory. He arrived in Harrow's Ford on a cold morning with 6 soldiers and a request. He wanted Vola, not because he trusted her, and not because he liked the idea. He wanted her because she was the best person within reach who knew the contested terrain, and he was man enough to know it. He came to the river Smithy to find Henry because in the way of small towns, everyone in Harrow's Ford knew that finding Henry meant finding Vola. Henry set down his tools. "No," he said. Renwick looked at him with the expression of a man who is not used to that word from tradespeople. "She is the most qualified. She is not your soldier, your servant, or your treaty asset," Henry said. "She is a private citizen working a private contract. You want her help, you ask her yourself." A beat. Renwick's jaw was doing the thing it did when he was recalculating. "Will she agree to speak with me?" Renwick asked. "I have no idea," Henry said. "She makes her own decisions." When Renwick put his request to Vola directly, she considered it for a long time. Henry was in the room and he said nothing, which was the right thing to do, and she looked at him once as if confirming it before she looked back at Renwick. She set terms, a written guarantee of safe passage, signed by Renwick and countersigned by the Caldenmere garrison commander, payment in advance, and Henry as her companion with full right of withdrawal at any point she chose. Renwick accepted all of it. They spent 2 weeks in the passes with Renwick's officers, working the contested boundary question with Vola's maps and Henry's practicality, about what horses could navigate, and what passes were defensible against the early spring runoff. It was hard, cold, brilliant work, and at the end of it the contested farms were remeasured, and the boundary redrawn in a way that both the cavalry and the Ashwalker Elder Council found acceptable. Corset, the war band leader, came to the final boundary meeting on the 4th day. He did not look at Vola when he arrived. He kept not looking at her through the entire meeting, which was worse than looking, and Henry watched the effort she put into holding her composure while the man who had cost her everything sat 20 feet away and treated her like furniture. On the way back to Harrow's Ford afterward in the long blue dusk of a winter evening, Henry said, "He knows you were right." She was quiet. "Yes," she said eventually. "I think he does." "Does it help?" Another pause. "It would help more if the Elder Council knew it," she said. "But the Elder Council is not my concern anymore. I chose not to be their concern." She paused. "It helps that I know it, and that you know it." "I do know it," he said. She looked at him sideways in the last of the light. "I know," she said. March came. The passes began to soften. The Harrow's Ford ran loud and brown with snowmelt, and the cartographer Aldi's worked his annual spring frenzy of map revisions, and Vola was in the middle of it with him, doing verification surveys every clear day, coming back to the inn each evening smelling of cold air and pine and ink from the copies she had been helping Aldi's make. Henry fixed horses in the spring. There was always work in spring, as animals that had been kept up through the winter worked on new terrain and threw shoes on thawed ground. He was busy and she was busy, and they were both content in a way he could not have described to anyone who asked, but which felt solid and specific, not the thin comfort of distraction but the actual filling of an actual space. One evening in late March, they were sitting on the stone wall above the ford, watching the river run, and she said, "My sister wrote to me." He looked at her. "The one still in the Ashwalker camp," he said. "Her name is Mar." She had a folded letter in her hands. She had been holding it since she came back from the cartographers, and he had not asked. "She says the council has begun discussing a formal reinstatement path for exiles who left voluntarily. She says Corset is no longer warband leader." A pause. "She says there may be a way back if I want it." Henry looked at the river. "Do you?" he said. A long, slow pause. "I do not want to go back to being Vola Ashwalker of the clan," she said. "I did not like that person very much toward the end. She was angry all the time, and she was shrinking herself to fit into spaces that were not built for her." She folded the letter carefully. "But I miss my sister. And I think I would like to go back to the camp at some point, not as a returning exile but as Vola who lives elsewhere and comes to visit." "That sounds like a better version," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Will you come with me?" "When I go?" He looked at her. "Of course," he said. She put the letter in her pocket and leaned her shoulder against his on the wall, and they watched the river go. It was the second week of April when Farrell came back. Henry had almost forgotten about Farrell, which was his mistake. Farrell had not forgotten about him, or about Vola, and Farrell had spent the winter in Caldenmere with Renwick's column, growing more and more resentful about the boundary settlement, which he considered a surrender, and about the Ashwalker exile who had, in his view, manipulated a good cavalry captain into a bad deal by way of a farrier who should have kept his mouth shut. Farrell arrived in Harrow's Ford with 3 other soldiers. 2 of them men Henry did not know, and he did not come to the smithy. He went directly to the market square. Vola was there. She had been at Aldi's in the morning and was coming back through the square when Farrell's group came in from the north road, and he saw her before she saw him, and he came at her across the square with the particular energy of a man who has been rehearsing this in his head for months. Henry heard the commotion from the smithy, and was out the door before he had consciously decided to move. By the time he reached the square, there was a crowd again, smaller than in Caldenmere, 20 people or so, mostly traders and townsfolk, and Farrell was standing in the square with Vola 8 feet in front of him and his 3 soldiers fanned out behind him, and he was saying, in a voice pitched to Carey, "Captain Renwick wants her brought in for questioning regarding the boundary survey. We have reason to believe she manipulated the territorial assessment." The square was quiet. Vola was standing with her arms at her sides and her face doing nothing at all, the absolute cold nothing that she did when she was most furious and most controlled simultaneously. "On whose orders?" she said. "Captain Renwick's. The boundary survey was commissioned and verified by the garrison commander at Caldenmere," she said. "Any review of it requires the garrison commander's written order, not a sergeant's word." She paused. "Do you have that order?" Farrell's jaw worked. He did not have that order. "I have Captain Renwick's. I asked about a written garrison order," she said. Her voice was perfectly level, carrying easily across the square. "Do you have one? Yes or no?" The crowd was very quiet. "No," Farrell said, after a pause that cost him visibly. "Then you have no authority to bring me anywhere," she said. "I am a private citizen contracted to a Harrow's Ford cartographer with a signed guarantee of safe passage from your own captain. If Captain Renwick wishes to review the boundary survey, he may contact Aldi's, who has the original maps and the survey records, or he may contact the garrison commander and produce a proper order." She tilted her head very slightly. "Good morning, Sergeant." She walked. She just walked directly across the square toward the smithy, and the crowd split for her, not because they feared her, but because she moved as if there was no question of them not splitting, and the crowd responded to the certainty of it the way crowds always do. Henry was standing at the edge of the square. She walked toward him and he stepped into the road and stood beside her. Farrell called after them, something heated and unspecific. Henry did not stop. Neither did Vola. They went to the smithy. She came inside and he closed the door and he turned to look at her. She was shaking. Very slightly, barely visible, but shaking. He crossed the floor and put his arms around her and she stood very still for a moment. And then she pressed her face against his neck, and he felt the breath go out of her in a long, silent shudder that was 3 months of moving alone through a world that had decided it did not want her, and the way station blizzard, and the camp where her aunt had watched her from 20 feet away and Corsaid not looking at her, and the letter from Mar she had been carrying in her pocket for a week. He held on. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say that was more useful than staying exactly where he was. After a while she said, into his neck, "I knew he would come back." "Yes," Henry said. "I should not have let him," she said. "I should have. You handled him perfectly," Henry said. "In front of 20 people he left empty-handed," she breathed. "He will go to Renwick," she said. "Renwick is 3 weeks from being transferred to the southern posts," Henry said. "I heard it from the garrison quartermaster last week. Whatever Farrell brings him will not be Renwick's problem much longer." He paused. "And the new garrison commander is a woman named Ashfort who negotiated the Western Orc Treaty 2 years ago. She will not be interested in reopening boundary questions that are already settled." Vola lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who cried easily, which did not surprise him, but there was something in them that was softer than anything he had seen from her. "How do you know all of this?" she said. "I listen," he said. "People talk to farriers. We are the furniture of military operations. Nobody bothers to be guarded around us." She made the sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one, and then she looked at him for a long moment with her hands resting on his chest and his arms still around her. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I am not going to leave," she said. "I want you to know that. I have been thinking about it since you walked through that crowd in Caldenmere, and I have been thinking about it since the camp and since the passes and since March on the wall above the ford." She paused. "I am not going to leave. Not unless you ask me to, and even then I am going to argue with you about it." He tightened his arms around her. "I am not going to ask you to," he said. "Good," she said, "because I would win the argument." "I know," he said. She kissed him then, deliberate and close, her hands in his hair, and the smithy was warm and smelled of coal and iron, and the spring air coming through the gap under the door, and outside the ford was loud with snowmelt, and the town was going about its business, and neither of them was moving anywhere. In April, when the passes were properly clear, they rode to the Ashwalker camp. Not as a diplomatic delegation, not as returning exiles. Just the two of them, on Brick and a horse Vola had acquired from Aldi's in lieu of part of her winter wages, riding south through the greening pass with the mountains still white above them, and the road muddy and deep with the good, particular smell of ground that has been under snow for 4 months and is remembering itself. Henry did not know what to expect. He had been to the camp once before under cavalry colors and with Renwick's politics around him. This was different. Mar met them at the camp's outer edge. She was younger than Vola, rounder-faced with the same amber eyes, and she looked at her sister for a long moment, and then she crossed the ground between them fast and took Vola by the shoulders and held her, and Vola put her arms around her sister and closed her eyes. Henry stayed on Brick. He did not intrude. Mar looked up at him over Vola's shoulder after a while. She had the same quality her sister had of assessing carefully and showing nothing while she did it. "The farrier," she said. "Yes," Henry said, "the one who stood in the road." "That is one way to describe it," he said. Mar looked at her sister, then back at him. Something decided itself in her face. "Come down off the horse," she said. "You will want to eat before you meet anyone." They spent 3 days at the camp. Henry shod 4 horses that needed it, including a beautiful gray stallion belonging to the new warband leader, a young woman named Svet who was practical and sharp, and received Henry in her tent with the direct, assessing courtesy of someone who had decided to assume the best until proven wrong. He found this deeply refreshing. Vola talked to Mar. She talked to 2 elder council members. She did not talk to her Aunt Brenna, not directly, not yet, but on the second morning Brenna passed them in the camp's central street and stopped, and she and Vola stood looking at each other for a long moment, and then Brenna said something short and Vola said something back and Brenna nodded once and kept walking. "What did she say?" Henry asked. "She said the exile stands," Vola said. "She will not argue to reverse it." "And you said?" "I said I was not here to ask her to." A pause. "I said I was here to see my sister." "How did she take that?" "She nodded," Vola said. "For Brenna, that is a great deal." On the third morning, Henry went to saddle the horses and found Mar in the stable grooming Brick with an expression of focused attention that he recognized as her sister's. "She is happy," Mar said without looking up. "I am glad," he said. "She does not do this," Mar said. "Staying, she does not do it. She has been running since she was 20 from one thing to the next, and every time someone tried to hold on she would be gone before they finished the reaching." She looked up then with those amber eyes, and her expression was not a threat and it was not a warning. It was the expression of someone being honest because they had decided he deserved it. "She has not run from you." Henry was quiet. "I know," he said. "Do you know why?" Mar asked. He thought about it carefully. "Because I told her the truth," he said, "about everything from the beginning, and I did not ask her to be less than she is." He paused, "And I stood in the road when it mattered." Mar looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "that is why." She gave Brick's flank a firm pat and walked out of the stable. They left the camp mid-morning, south riding toward Harrow's Ford, the spring air warm enough now to ride without hoods, the mountains going green on their lower slopes. Vola was quiet in the particular way she was quiet after something large had happened, not shut down, just inward processing. At the top of the long rise that gave a view back over the valley where the Ashwalker camp sat, she stopped her horse and looked back. Henry stopped beside her. The camp was small from here, tidy smoke rising from its fires in the late morning air. He could not pick out any individual person. It was just a human-shaped place in the valley, full of people living their lives. "Mar is going to come to Harrow's Ford in the summer," Vola said, "for the survey work. Aldis has been wanting an Ashwalker guide for the southern routes for years." "That is good," Henry said. She nodded, kept looking. "I am not going back to it," she said. "I want you to know that I know that. I am not going back to the clan standing and the warband politics and the elder council's requirements." She paused. "But I am glad it is there, that the people are there." "Yes," he said. She turned and looked at him. The spring light was full on her face, the green of her skin warm in it, her amber eyes clear and direct. "I want to stay in Harrow's Ford," she said. "For a while, for the survey contract, for Aldis." She paused. "For you, that is convenient," he said, "since my contract there runs through the autumn." "And after the autumn," he held her gaze. "After the autumn we decide together where to be next," he said. She breathed. "I have not done that," she said. "Decided things together." "Neither have I," he said. "We can figure it out." She reached across the space between their horses and took his hand, the same deliberate, unhurried grip she had used on the stone wall in Caldenmere when everything was still uncertain and she had reached anyway. He held on. They turned their horses south and rode down off the ridge toward the road, and the mountains were white above them and the valley was green below, and the Ford River was loud and cold and full of snowmelt in the distance, running toward the spring. 2 weeks later, Renwick's transfer order came through, and with it the formal confirmation that the Ashwalker boundary settlement stood and would not be reopened. Commander Ashford arrived in Caldenmere with a practical, businesslike manner and a complete lack of interest in old border grievances, and the first thing she did was send a courteous letter to Vola Ashwalker of Harrow's Ford confirming the safe passage guarantee and extending it indefinitely. Farrell was reassigned to a southern post. He did not pass through Harrow's Ford on his way there. Henry heard about this from the garrison quartermaster, who passed through for horse work, and he told Vola over dinner at the inn. She received it with the equanimity she brought to everything, and then she said, "I would like to celebrate." "How?" he said. "There is a good bottle of something in Aldis's kitchen that he has been saving," she said, "and he has been waiting for a reason to open it." "I will tell him we have won," Henry said. Aldous received the news with a quiet pleasure that expressed itself as fetching the bottle and setting out cups without making any particular fuss, which was the best possible response. They sat around the cartographer's fire. Aldous, Vola, Henry, and Marcus, the smithy man, and his wife, who had been the two townspeople present for the Market Square kiss in January, and who had, over the winter, become the sort of people who brought Henry extra bread when they passed the smithy, and asked Vola good-natured questions about the survey routes. The fire was warm. The drink was good. Aldous fell asleep in his chair within the first hour, and they kept talking around him in lower voices. Walking back to the inn that night late, with the town quiet and the Ford River loud in the dark, Vola said, "This is the longest I have stayed anywhere voluntarily in 6 years. How does it feel?" Henry said. She was quiet for a moment, walking beside him with her shoulder close to his and the stars overhead between the mountain ridges. "It feels like something I chose," she said. "Not something that happened to me and not something I settled for, something I chose." He stopped walking. She stopped with him, turned to look at him. He said, "I need you to know something." "Tell me," she said. "From the morning you walked out through the way station gate," he said, "I have thought about you every day. Not in a way I could explain easily, not in a way I tried to make sense of at first, just persistently, like something that was trying to tell me something." He paused. "And what it was trying to tell me was that the hollow in the middle of my life was not a flaw in me. It was just an empty space, and empty spaces can be filled if you let the right thing in." She looked at him for a long time. The street was empty. The stars were cold and brilliant overhead. "I am the right thing," she said. "Yes," he said. She stepped forward and put her hands on his face and kissed him in the middle of the empty street, with the mountain dark around them and the Ford running loud in the night. And it was nothing like their first kiss that had been cautious and deliberate, two people in the firelight deciding something. This was certain. This was both of them completely sure. This was the specific warmth of choosing and being chosen simultaneously. When she pulled back, she was close, her forehead almost against his, her amber eyes finding his in the dark. "I want you to know something too," she said. Her voice was low. "Tell me," he said. "I am going to make it difficult for you to leave," she said. "Not by holding you, not by asking you to give things up, just by making it true that being with me is the best available option." She paused. "I am competitive. This is how I compete." He laughed, low and real, and she smiled, a full, open smile that he had now seen a dozen times and still felt in his sternum every single time. "You are already winning," he said. "Good," she said. "I intend to keep winning indefinitely." He took her hand and they walked back to the inn through the quiet spring night. There was the morning in May when Corsair rode through Harrow's Ford alone, heading south, and stopped at the smithy to have his horse shod, a coincidence of geography, nothing more, and he saw Vola in the smithy doorway and stopped. And for a moment the two of them were looking at each other in the morning light, and Henry, who was holding Corsair's horse's hoof, held it and said nothing. Corsair said something to Vola in the Ashwalker language. His voice was low, and he said it looking at the horse, not at her, and she listened without expression, and then she said something back, a few words, equally low. Henry looked up at her after Corsair had ridden away. "What did he say?" Henry asked. "He said the merchant's family sent a gift to the clan last winter," she said, "for the safe passage guarantee they gave them before the treaty." She paused. "He said they asked the council to remember who had argued for them." "And you said—" "I said I heard him." She was quiet for a moment. "That is all I needed to say." Henry finished the shoe, set the hoof down, and straightened. She was looking at the road where Corsair had gone. Her face was the complex, careful thing it was, when she was feeling something she was not ready to name. He went to her and put his hand on her back between her shoulder blades, and she leaned into it slightly, just slightly, the small, unconscious lean of someone who has decided without announcement that a person is their anchor. "You were right," he said. "Yes," she said, "I was," and the tightness around her eyes loosened. "It took a while to hear it." "Worth it anyway," he said. She turned and looked at him. Then she put her hand on his jaw, rough and warm, The specific touch she had that was the clearest thing she did, direct, claiming, gentle underneath. "Yes," she said, "worth it anyway." Summer came in on the Ford River like a green wave. Mar arrived in July, as promised, and was immediately indispensable to Aldis's Southern Survey project, and she and Henry developed an easy partnership based on the shared understanding that they were both, in their different ways, devoted to Vola's continued not leaving. Mar teased him. He took it with good grace. Vola observed this dynamic with the expression of someone who is both exasperated and privately delighted. The survey work expanded that summer. Aldis had a commission from the Caldenmere garrison for detailed maps of 3 contested high passes, and Vola and Mar were doing the field work, while Aldis and a young apprentice draftsman handled the cartography. Henry shod every horse the survey team used, maintained them through 2 difficult high-altitude surveys, and spent enough days in the passes that summer that he became, by accident, a reasonably competent camp cook. Vola informed him that this was an additional quality she had not anticipated but was very happy about. He informed her that he had been cooking for himself for 8 years, and it was not a skill so much as a necessity. She kissed him in the camp kitchen in a way that suggested she disagreed about the skill-necessity distinction, and he decided she was probably right. In August, on a survey night 3 days out of Harrow's Ford in the high pass they had named Coldgate for the survey record, they lay side by side under the enormous mountain stars, and Vola said, "I want to tell you something." "Tell me," he said. "I am afraid sometimes," she said. "I do not talk about it, but I want you to know it is there. The exile does something to you. It tells you that you were not worth keeping, and I know it was a lie. I know the council was wrong and Corsair was wrong and I was right to go. But the lie is still in there sometimes, quiet, waiting for me to be tired." He was quiet, listening. "When I am tired and the lie is there," she said, "I think about the way station, the door you opened, the fire you made." She paused. "The way you stood at the gate and told me you noticed me." She paused again, "and it is enough to make the lie shut up." He turned his head and looked at her in the starlight. "It was not difficult to notice you," he said. "You walked out of a blizzard and stood still enough that the world had to pay attention." She breathed. "Henry." "Yes. I chose you," she said. "I want to be very clear about that. Not because you were convenient, not because you were kind at the right moment, not because you stood in a crowd for me. Those things mattered. But I chose you because of who you are when there is nothing at stake, when you are just working, just talking, just sitting on a wall watching a river. That person is who I want." She paused. "I want you to know that I know the difference." He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I have been alone for 8 years in a way that I had decided was permanent. Not a tragedy, just what was true. And then you walked in out of the cold and the world rearranged itself into something with a center." She turned her head and looked at him. "I am the center," she said. "You are the center," he said. She moved, and he moved, and the stars were enormous and cold and indifferent overhead, and between them there was everything that the mountain dark was not, which was warm and specific and alive. The survey commission wrapped in late September, when the first frost dusted the high passes, and Aldis declared the field work complete with the satisfaction of a man who has done exactly what he intended. The maps were good. Henry had seen Aldis's work, and it was meticulous, the kind of cartography that would be used for a generation. And the garrison commander in Caldenmere sent a letter of formal thanks that Aldis read aloud at the inn to the assembled survey team, and then folded and put in a drawer with all his other documents, pleased and ordinary about it. Mar went back to the Ashwalker camp in early October. Her departure was loud and warm. She held Vola for a long time, said something in the clan language that made Vola's eyes go bright, then turned to Henry and put her hand on his shoulder and said, "You are good for her." "She is good for me," he said. "Yes," Mar said. "But she knows that. I wanted to make sure you knew the other part." She rode south with one of Aldis's apprentices who was also heading toward the valley road, and they watched her go from the Ford Bridge, the river cold and low in the autumn morning. Henry's autumn contract in Harrow's Ford ran to the end of October. In the third week of October, the Caldenmere garrison quartermaster came through with a winter contract offer. The new garrison commander wanted a permanent farrier posted at Caldenmere for the winter months, regular salary, good stable conditions, and the garrison smithy to use freely. It was a good contract, better than anything he had contracted to individually. He brought it back to the inn and laid it on the table in front of Vola. She read it, looked up. "Caldenmere," she said. "Yes," he said, "a day from Harrow's Ford, and Aldi's has indicated that the spring survey season will likely run out of Harrow's Ford again, which means the team will be passing through Caldenmere regularly." She looked at the contract and then at him. "You are asking me to come with you," she said. "I am showing you the information," he said. "You make your own decisions." She looked at him for a moment with something that was half exasperation and half deeply amused. "Henry Dalton," she said. "Vola Ashwalker," he said. "Yes," she said, "I am coming with you." On the last evening in Harrow's Ford, Marcus the smithy man and his wife had them to dinner, a real meal, at their table, which Henry had eaten at once or twice through the winter. Marcus's wife had cooked something that involved the last of the autumn vegetables and a great deal of good bread, and the four of them sat around the table and ate and talked, and the fire was warm, and the street outside was quiet with the first cold night of the season. When Henry and Vola walked back to the inn afterward, the market square was empty, lit by 2 torches at the well. He stopped at the edge of the square. She stopped beside him. "What?" she said. "I was just thinking," he said, "about the morning in Caldenmere when Farrell had the crowd." "What about it?" she said. "You walked out of that square," he said. "You handled him perfectly in front of everyone, and then you walked across to me and I stepped into the road beside you and you said I stood in the road. And the way you said it," she looked at him. "What about the way I said it?" she asked. "It sounded," he said, "like you had been waiting a long time for someone to do it." She was very quiet. "Yes," she said, "I had been a pause a long time." He took her hand. She tightened her grip. They stood in the empty square for a moment, and then she leaned in and kissed him, slow and certain, and it was entirely different from the quick, decisive first kiss and the certain street kiss and all the others. This one was quiet, the kind of kiss that does not need anything else, that is its own complete thing. When she pulled back, she was looking at him with the full, open expression that was still, months later, the most startling thing she did, because she had spent so much of herself on being closed and controlled, and when she opened, she did it all the way. "I want to be done leaving," she said. "Good," he said. "So do I." They left for Caldenmere the next morning before the frost was off the road, Vola on her horse and Henry on Brick, their packs full, and the mountain day clear and cold and bright. The garrison town sat at the base of the pass like a sensible thing, solid and practical, and the garrison commander received them both with the businesslike courtesy that Henry had come to appreciate as the best possible kind. Commander Ashfort showed Henry the garrison smithy, which was excellent, and showed Vola the garrison's existing survey maps, which were adequate, and suggested with the directness of a competent administrator that if Vola were interested in a consulting arrangement through the winter there was work to be had. Vola considered it for exactly as long as Henry would have expected, which was not long. "Yes," she said, "I am interested." The next morning Henry was at the garrison forge by first light. He was heating the iron and listening to the particular percussion of the hammer and feeling, with the complete specificity of a man who has spent 8 years learning the difference between fine and good, that he was good. Not fine, good. He heard the stable door and looked up. Vola was in the doorway with 2 cups of something hot, and she was wearing the same fitted traveling leather she had worn since Thornback, the same dark cloak, the same iron-ringed braid, and she looked at him the way she looked at him now, the full, undefended look, the one that said she had stopped measuring the distance between where she was and where she might need to go. She crossed the stable and handed him a cup. "The roan outside needs a shoe," she said. "Which foot?" he said. "Near 4," she said. "After this one," he said. She leaned against the forge wall with her cup and watched him work, and he was aware of her presence the way he was always aware of her presence, as something solid and specific in the world, as something that made the world feel like it had edges and weight. And outside the stable door, Caldenmere was waking up in the cold morning, and the mountains were white and blue in the early light, and the pass road ran north to Thornback where it had started, and south to the valley and the Ashwalker camp and Harrow's Ford and all the other places where the two of them had stood in roads and made decisions. He finished the shoe, set it, checked the angle. It was good work. "You do that with pleasure," she said, watching. "Yes," he said, "I always have." She looked at him with the half-smile that was still consistently the thing he most wanted to see in any given morning. "I think," she said, "that I am beginning to understand that about you." "The pleasure," he said. "The consistency of it," she said. "The way you are the same person at the forge at dawn as you are in the camp at midnight as you are in a crowd with someone shouting at you." She paused. "It is an unusual quality." "Most people think it is boring," he said. "Most people," she said, "are wrong about a surprising number of things." He set down the hammer and turned to look at her. She was close enough that he could see the amber of her eyes catching the forge light. "I love you," he said. He said it simply because simple was always the most accurate. She was quiet for one breath. Then she said, "I love you." She said it with the particular weight of someone who has thought carefully about each word before using it. "I am not practiced at saying it. I may say it wrong some days." "You said it right this time," he said. "Good," she said. "I will try to say it right most of the time." He closed the remaining distance and kissed her in the forge light, her hands finding his shoulders, his finding her face, the coal and the cold iron and the morning all around them. And outside the garrison was loud, and the mountains were white, and the day was opening up enormous and clear. She had walked out of a blizzard 6 months ago and stood still in the snow, and he had stepped out of a stable door, and everything that followed had been the logical consequence of two people who had spent years moving and finally, at a mountain way station in the middle of a storm, found someone worth the difficulty of staying. She did not leave. He stood in the road. And that exactly and fully was that.